The red light's on. We are recording. Hey, I'm David Brownstein. This is Ronan Chris Murphy with me. Hey, Ronan.
Hey, it's great to be with you.
Great to have you. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, folks, to another day of Music Industry Evolution Summit. I'm your host, David Brownstein, and our guest is Ryan Chris Murphy. I'm going to read you his bio because that's how I like to do things. Um, Ronan Chris Murphy is a multi-genre record producer and engineer who works around the world. His diverse album credits include Guar, King Crimson, many albums, several albums, Terry Bozzio, Steve Morse, Ulver, who I've never heard of, T.O., Jamie Walters, and hundreds more. His video game credits include Assassin's Creed, Brotherhood, Yoku's Island Express, and Mafia 3. He recently mastered the score album for Jordan Peele's hit film Get Out. He works in studios around the world, as well as his own studio, Veneto West, just outside of Los Angeles. Welcome, Ronan.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, really. Is that what we're seeing behind you now?
We are, yes. I was down in Santa Monica before this, but I bought a big cabin up in the mountains north of Los Angeles, and I bought it because of this room. I saw this room online and decided to buy that building.
That's how engineer producers make decisions.
Yes, we're a weird bunch for sure.
That's great. That's great. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about guitars and recording today. But let me first start with this. What was your initial hook? When did music get its hooks in you? What was your first artist, music, sound thing that just took hold of you?
I mean, I don't really remember a time that it didn't have its hooks in me. And I just remember like in kindergarten thinking me and another girl in the class were going to start a band and be stars.
Of course.
And of course I loved Kiss when I was a kid. But there was something about Neil Young that sort of clicked where it really became, oh yeah, this is a thing. This is a thing I should be doing. And I don't know what it was about Neil Young, but it was actually a guy playing a cover song of Neil Young, like at out in the mountains of West Virginia, and him playing that song just like hit me in this such profound way. And I was like, yeah, yep, this is it. This is it.
Was it noisy electric Neil Young or acoustic?
No, guy in acoustic guitar singing, "Hey, hey, my." And that's one of those kind of pivotal moments I remember. But so I always kind of had this ambition to do it, and I think the great thing, it was sort of hardcore punk gave me the license to do it, because it was a fantastic thing. I was really blessed to be in the Washington, D.C. area in the early 80s, which in the United States, like L.A. and D.C. were kind of like the places to be. And I was really lucky to be sort of tapped into that.
Right.
And it was really great because, again, that whole thing, there was this big DIY ethic. And the whole thing about punk and hardcore was like, you decided you were in a band with some guys, and then you figured out the logistics, like, oh, do you play anything? No. Oh, you're the singer. Okay. Do you play anything? No. Okay, you're the bass player. And then you sort of work from there. And then once I started kind of playing in this sort of a DC kind of punk scene, it's just been nonstop. I mean, music's sort of been the center of my life ever since.
And do you play guitar as well, I take it?
Yeah. So that's that really, I mean, I started singing in bands. And the funny thing was I didn't start playing guitar really until I was about 18, and I was just in a band, and I got really frustrated with that whole thing where I'd be with my guitar player and be like, we should do this song that'd be like da na 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 na, and he'd play something. I'd be like, no, 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 no. And then I'm like, all right, I just got to learn how to go no, 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 no myself. And so I just kind of became obsessed. And I don't have any natural musical ability, but I just became obsessed by it. So I kind of bought a guitar. 3 months later, I was in a band where I was the primary songwriter on guitar. And then 3 months after that, we were gigging. And again, none of that is natural talent or ability. It was just, I was just obsessed about doing it. And, if I was awake and not doing something else, I was practicing guitar.
And was
Go
ahead.
I wish I still got to practice guitar as much as I'd like to, but.
Right. And was that a punk band, your first band?
Mm. Yeah, we were in the. It was this band I started called Freak Baby. Um, Again, yappy little punk rock band, musically insignificant. But the funny thing is, you actually read about Freak Baby in music books and things like that because um, I quit the band in like 1984 because I thought, well, punk has kind of run its course. It's done.
Right, of course.
Yeah, brilliant observation there. But I quit the band to start something new and took the guitar player with me. And the replacement guitar player in Freak Baby was Dave Grohl. And so my first band and Dave Grohl's first band were the same band, but I've never been in a band with Dave Grohl.
Right, right. Wow, that's interesting. Funny,
Yeah.
funny,
Yeah. And
cool.
he was kind of brilliant. I mean, he was a 14-year-old kid who could play all the songs on Slayer's Haunting the Chapel record. So we're like, this guy's amazing. And he kind of decided to play drums just because logistically the band ended up moving people around, and like literally like almost within weeks of starting to play drums, he was Dave Grohl, the drummer, and we all knew, everybody knew when he was like 15 that he was going to be a rock star. He'd
Wow.
never be in a band like Nirvana, he'd join Motley Crue or something like that. But
Right, of course, the obvious
everybody
choice. Yeah.
knew he was just such a natural star. Everybody knew it.
Wow, wow, that's really interesting. Um, well, so then cut to you're recording some of the great guitar players of all time. Um, Not everybody knows who King Crimson and Robert Fripp is, but I do.
Yeah.
And what did you learn from recording with Fripp?
Well, I mean, King Crimson was an interesting thing because you have both Robert Fripp and Adrian Belew, who are
Oh,
just both remarkable, remarkable guitar players. Um, and it's hard to encapsulate that. I mean, but the interesting thing about Fripp is that what I like about him is he's always sort of setting up challenges in his circumstance in a way. So there's always hey, let's reconfigure the band this way. Hey, let's look at making a record in this way, kind of constantly changing the scenario, I think,
hmm
as a way of keeping the beast evolving. Because I mean, it's pretty remarkable, like a band that's been going that long in different configurations that has covered so much territory. If you listen to something from 83 and something from 72, without the knowledge of it, there's no way you would ever assume they were even the same band or had any of the same members in it.
Well, is he doing it to kind of create chaos, or is he just get bored, or somewhere in between, or like
I don't,
Eno seems to like change just to kind of screw with people sometimes.
yeah, I don't think I would ever describe it as creating chaos, but creating new opportunities for different things to happen. Like when I came on board, King Crimson had sort of ballooned into this, they called it the double trio,
Right.
where you had 6 guys in the band, and every one of those guys played enough for a whole band by themselves. And so like multiply that by 6. So I mean, the first things I was brought in was to try and mix some of those records, like mix some live albums from that group. But at the time, they were also breaking that up into modular units. So they would take the 6 members and create these sort of mini groups and send them out on the road to improvise uh, in front of an audience. And so we would go out and record those improvisations and things like that. And obviously, ideas would develop. And then I'd bring all the tapes back to the studio. I'd kind of pull out the juiciest parts uh, of those, mix those down, and then myself, and there was another guy named David Singleton, would sort of go in and go, oh yeah, this could go with this, and this could go with this. And so in a way, we would start actually crafting these songs, and then that group or another of the modular groups would go out kind of taking those ideas that had been developed from that and then develop kind of new songs based on that. So it was a really interesting kind of unique way of doing it.
Wow, wow. Well, so I imagine mixing that stuff. You had a lot of guitars, a lot of basses.
Yeah.
How, I don't know. Just wondering, was there a lesson in there as an engineer, as a producer for you, about dealing with sound, dealing with the low end? I mean, not that I don't want to get too geeky, but
Yeah.
partly I do and partly I don't.
Well, I mean, for me, like mixing the King Crimson double trio, like, that was my doctorate degree
Right.
in engineering. And thankfully, brilliant producer and engineer named David Bottrell,
Oh,
who's
yeah.
worked with Tool and Peter Gabriel and lots of other great bands. He had actually done a record with them before I came and started mixing for him. So I was able to sort of go, okay, how did he wrestle with this problem? Because not only was it a lot of people, but it was stereo guitars, like everything stereo, and multiple drummers with big drum kits. So there really was a lot of intense work about finding space for things. And I think that was probably a big evolution in my understanding of, arranging and engineering and producing, because one of the things that really separates, a lot of the great mixers from, the people just coming up, is kind of getting an understanding of where things fit together. How do you put together a big picture? Because the sort of lesser experienced MO is to go, oh, let's make everything big and giant and take up all the space, and then every
With
other
each
element will
instrument.
be
Yeah. Yeah.
giant and big and take up all the space. And they wonder why they put on their favorite commercial recordings and go, why does mine sound so flat, so mono, so dull, so not tall? And it's like, well, you haven't figured that out. And so, King Crimson double trio was, again, it was my doctorate degree, trial by fire. and
Wow.
and so
Wow.
it was a great opportunity for that. And of course, I was a fan of the band before I started working with them. So that was really cool for me
That's
on that level
amazing.
as well.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Maybe we can post a link to some of that stuff on the
Mhm.
Facebook
Yeah.
group, 'cause I would like to hear some of those things. Well, because I'm a bass player and guitar player, and I'm always multiple tracking things. And yes, I've also learned the more tracks, the thinner I make them, and and spatially, pan them and stuff. And
Yeah. And of course, the great thing about, working with King Crimson is, working with w- one of the greatest bass players of all time. To be in the studio with Tony Levin is just, I mean, and I've been lucky to work on other projects with him as well. But, there's few people I've learned as much from as working in the studio with Tony Levin. And he's never sat me down and taught me anything, but being able to work with him, observe how he works, to see how he kind of conceptualizes and what he brings to different situations. I could think of very few people in my whole life where I've ever kind of learned as much from as just getting to be in the studio with him and getting to be out on the road with him.
any little thing you can tidbit of Tony Levin wisdom
Well,
or
yeah,
experience?
I mean, the great thing, and this might sound kind of generic, but I've never met anybody who so consistently plays the right thing to suit the music.
Mm, mm,
Because, he is a guy who can obviously, oh, you just need this fancy double tap thing in 7/8,
no problem.
over
Yeah.
15/8, whatever. Yeah, whatever. But he's also a guy who's totally happy to play like one whole note every 8 bars. And, there's never a part like, oh, I need to get this lick in or anything like that. He always just seems to have a really innate understanding and a way of working, going, what does this really need? What do I bring to it? And which again, it's so easy as musicians and those of us who work in it to really want to sort of here throw in our chops, and,
Right.
and we,
Right.
we do it from an engineering point of view as well. We go, oh my God, when I'm going to get this snare drum to be so killer that, kids are going to worship me. And then you realize, actually, the important thing about this is that vocal and the
The vocal.
storytelling. And my
Yeah.
killer giant snare drum has actually disconnected people from the story. So
Right. I always talk about that, telling the story of the song. Everything's got to be telling the story of
mhm.
the song. That's great. That's great. Well, so we're in an interesting time in the world where we're kind of locked down and working in our home studios, and also speaking as a guitar player, bass player. There's such great samples of guitar and bass things, and sometimes I'm in the middle of a track and I go, oh, I know exactly what I need. I'm like, I'll just get my mic and my guitar, and then I'm like, actually maybe I'll just do it in Contact, it'll be faster. So even I noticed that. But I'm just wondering if let's talk about today is like your recommendations for how people can, what are the best ways to track at home?
Mhm.
We're stuck in lockdown. What are the best ways to like get a good sound and make it painless so that I don't just keep going back to my Contact player? I mean, there's a time and place for that, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And to me, I don't necessarily always consider those one of those superior than the other. you know, if I'm working with a virtual bass or a virtual guitar or something like that, to me, a virtual guitar, virtual bass is a distinct instrument. You know,
Yeah.
just the same way that an acoustic upright is a distinct instrument from, you know, a jazz bass and things like that. So I'm always just kind of looking at those and not trying to get too tied up in, oh, what is superior correct. It's okay, what is going to serve the song in terms of that. The one thing about guitar and bass that's so cool is it's actually not that complicated to get cool sounds. And but a lot of people spend a lot of effort doing things to mess that up. and it's kind of crazy. So you know, basses and guitars are kind of different, but I will say on guitars I have a very strong bias that the overwhelming majority of the time a microphone really needs to be involved
Hmm.
to get what I consider kind of great sounds and to get the kind of sounds that I understand to work well in a mix. And there's guys and gals who I respect who have a different opinion about that than I do. But
What
I
is, I agree with you. But how would you articulate why is that? I mean, without getting too deep into the physics of it, but like, why? Is there a
well
layman's way you can explain?
well there's a couple different things. And again, breaking this down into electric guitars and acoustic guitars.
Yeah.
Um, but there's a few things. One is just I think that going through a speaker, usually a 12-inch speaker, that there's a natural softening of top end in a way.
Hmm.
There's sort of a natural way to kind of remove excessive harmonics from the
Mm-hmm.
sound that clears out a lot of hash that, you know, your sort of digitally modeled things don't necessarily do in a way.
Hmm.
And there's just witchcraft and voodoo. I mean, it's one of those things where um, I've never heard a digital amp modeler sound that I've found to be superior to what I could do with $100 mic and spending 4 minutes, you know, on placement on the app.
So
Um,
even with a cheap microphone,
well, I mean,
well, let's call
yeah,
it $100 a cheap mic. Yeah.
let's say inexpensive.
Inexpensive. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's one of those things. The Shure SM57 is the most popular guitar mic of all time, like without a hint of competition.
Right.
Like it's,
Right.
you know, it's just one of those things. It's so superior, and they're $100 new.
Right.
And so it's one of those things where it's the equivalent of like, yes, I'm buying the best race car ever designed and built, and it's $100. um,
Right. Right.
so, you
Right.
know, Van Halen 1 is a Shure SM57
Wow.
on a 12-inch speaker. A lot of that classic Steely Dan stuff is a Shure SM57 on a 12-inch speaker. You know, so all of this stuff, whether it's country, heavy metal, classic rock, um, pop, adult contemporary, you know, so many of the great iconic things are done with a Shure SM57 on a probably usually a 12-inch speaker. And one of those things too is I never find it to be problematic to do something the way the most successful people of all time have done it. It doesn't mean that there's not other ways that are valid, but you know, a lot of times, you know, people ask me for advice like, hey, I'm doing this thing, so I've got this condenser mic and I've got this ribbon mic and I've got this other thing and I'm working on, can you give me some tips and blending on this and how do I solve this problem? And this, like, okay, what are you going for? Well, you know, I'm kind of going like, I would love like that Van Halen 1, just that classic. I'm like, you mean that guitar sound that was done with a single microphone on a
Uh-huh.
cabinet? Yeah. So how do I get the three mics to work together? It's like, I, I, and
Take two away. Yeah.
that's not to say those other ways are invalid, and that's not to say that some of those techniques weren't done on records that I love. But the reality is, um, it's kind of complicated. And without getting too geeky and techy on it, whenever you use multiple mics on a guitar amp, you are 100% guaranteed to introduce phase problems. And when you introduce phase problems, there is generally smearing, which takes off articulation.
Hmm.
So that generally takes a little punch, clarity, and impact out of the sound. So that might be a fair trade-off for some other benefit you get from using those multiple mics. But you know, for me, I would say 95% of the records I do guitar wise, whether I'm, working on, a local indie band or cutting a demo with a buddy, to working with these kind of iconic guitar players, most of the time I'm working with a single microphone on a guitar cabinet.
Wow,
So
wow.
yeah, so that, like that last record I did for the band Guar, which is a very guitar record.
Hmm.
With the exception of about 8 bars on the record, everything else is single mic on a Marshall 412, a single SM57 on a Marshall 412 cabinet. We probably use 10 different guitar heads and 9 different guitars and different pedals and all of that, but it was
Wow,
SM57 on a 412 cabinet.
wow, wow. And
So
so what about recording acoustic guitars at home, like in songwriter mode, right?
yes, Shure SM57.
I've been hearing about that, Mike.
And people might think that I'm being sarcastic, but I'm not. Uh, and not to say that that's the only good mic you can use, but for me, with rare exceptions, taking a guitar amp and plugging it direct into your interface to record it that way, it's just sad to me most of the time. It's one of those things where it's almost kind of heartbreaking when somebody's like really proud of the record they finished and they give it to me and say, "Oh, check it out, blah blah blah." And so I'm all excited to hear it. I'm driving, I put it in the CD player in the car, and the opening first thing I hear is that plasticky direct guitar sound. It's like, wow, you didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And of course, the response is, well, yeah, but I don't have $10,000 for a Neumann. It's like, yeah, well, who said anything about that? Um, a Shure SM57 is actually a very good guitar mic, and sometimes in shootouts it will beat out my mics that are $1,500, $2,000. Not all the time. Sometimes the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the high end condensers will beat it out. But I would take a Shure SM57 on an acoustic guitar over a direct almost any time. Again,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that weird plasticky fake thing suits the song, especially if you're going to mess it up later or something like that. But it really is amazing just how much that simple thing of putting a single mic on an acoustic guitar, moving it around and listening to see how that mic sounds in different places on the guitar is so superior to what you can do with just plugging it in. And it's no louder. I mean, some people could say, well, I have a baby that sleeps down the hall at
Yeah.
5 p.m, so I can't blast dime out a Marshall. Great, but recording acoustic guitar with a Shure SM57 or similar kind of mic is no louder than plugging it straight into your interface.
Well, so yeah, that's great. So I was going to ask you, where should the mic be pointed? Should on an acoustic guitar should it be pointed into the sound hole? Should be where's the best placement? Because I'm also if we're home, I'm like I'm playing it and I'm miking it and I'm monitoring it. We're all doing the one
Mm-hmm.
person engineer, producer, artist, songwriter kick, right?
Mm-hmm. Well,
What's a good way to get started on mic placement for that?
one thing that I was really blessed with is when I started recording, I was in this band I loved. The bass player quit. I still needed to do music stuff, and another buddy of mine lent me a 4-track cassette recorder, and I started recording stuff. And I I think I might have had one outboard piece of gear that was from my guitar rack, a guitar rig, and you had the high frequency and low frequency EQ, and I think I had a mic. And so I spent a lot of time, I couldn't do anything fancy to stuff. I couldn't get something that was good enough and go, okay, cool, I've got a sweet plugin that'll, juice that up. And so I had to actually, do this crazy thing of listening to what I record to seeing if it sounded any good. And when I listen back to some of that stuff, I'm like, wow, that actually turned out really good. So this is a really long way to say, one crazy thing you could do is put a mic in front of your guitar and listen to what it sounds like in different places. Um,
Oh,
and
really?
and and so it's the kind of thing too. And there's not, I'll give you a quick starting point too. But it's the kind of thing where you can even just go point the guitar here, and I'd start about a foot or so out. It's a good starting point, saying, okay, the mic is pointing at the bridge. Strum a little bit. Mic is pointed at the sound hole. Strum a little bit. Mic is a couple inches above the sound hole, closer to the neck. mic is pointed at the neck. Do that, it's going to take you a minute, and then go back and listen, go, huh, wow, there's kind of a woody honkiness that I really like at the bridge, or, oh, I really like the boominess coming from the sound hole, or I really like the metallic jangly part of more towards the bridge. That said, if, we were going into combat and like, dude, you got a minute and a half to get us up and running to get this guitar mic'd, which sometimes you do doing live albums and stuff like that. I would start about a foot out, about near the 12th fret, or about where the neck meets the body of the guitar. The big scientific reason for that is kind of in the middle. It's got some of that boominess that you're going to get from the sound hole. It's got more of that metallic, scrapey, jangly thing we're going to get from, up by the strings on the neck and things like that. But if I had to just go in and didn't have the opportunity to go in and really move and test the mics, I'd start about a foot or so out, pointed at about where the neck meets the body of the guitar. And and the funny thing is, if you go back and look at studio sessions of, wow, look at that cool Pink Floyd studio shot, look at that cool Neil Young studio shot, they tend to have something like a Neumann U87 out there sitting about right at that spot. So it's a pretty safe spot if you don't have the time to do a quick test, but you do have a time.
You do have the time.
You're stuck at home in the zombie apocalypse. You've got time.
You've got time to test 3 positions of the microphone for yourself.
Exactly. One thing I will throw out too is that with all of this, that if you have the option, like if you do have a guitar that has a built-in mic and things like that, try it. And again, if you love it more than the sound that you're getting from the mic in front of it, well, that's the better option. My preferences doesn't mean your taste in a way, but you also have that option too for maybe some creative processing later, or if you're singing and playing guitar at the same time, that might open up some options to bail you out later, because somebody sitting in a chair singing and playing acoustic guitar at the same time, that's the scariest thing as an engineer. Like if you said, hey, we've got this big band we want you to record, be like, right on, cool. Hey, here's an orchestra. It's like, okay, cool. Give me a little time to set up first. And, hey, we got this guy sitting in a chair, finger style acoustic guitar and singing. Like, no.
What is it that makes that so
phase? Because
really?
you basically, both the voice and the guitar are hitting these 2 mics at different times. And when you blend them, and generally that kind of thing, you want to put those in a similar position in the mix, the phase relationship between those 2 instruments starts to create so many weird phase problems so much of the time that, that it freaks me out. There's some fancy workarounds for that, but that's still one of the trickiest things.
That's if you're doing too much, like a mic on voice and a mic on guitar, right?
Yeah, like if this was here and I was playing guitar and I had another mic, down here.
Right.
My voice would hit this mic and this mic. This one, it hit this mic, about a millisecond later.
Right.
Which is going to introduce all sorts of different phase problems. Of course, and every part of the guitar will hit this mic and that second mic at different times. So there's no way you can align them, because, sound comes from the whole range of the guitar. So, every part of the guitar has a different phase relationship between these 2 mics. All that said, some musicians just perform better getting to play and sing at the same time. And a musician getting to do a great performance is so much more important than anything I'm going to whine about in terms of phase relationships and stuff like that. Because, if it's an amazing performance, nobody cares. All of a sudden it sounds a little weird and honky or something like that. And if it's a crappy performance, nobody cares if it sounds pristine.
Well, let me ask 2 questions in one. What about one mic, or let's say we're doing a live stream, a singer-songwriter who sings, plays guitar. Like I opened up my phone the other day and Ricky Lee Jones is performing in her living room with one mic, and
fantastic.
Amazing, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. One mic out in front is such a great way. I've actually done records where our solution to that was actually just to have, record one mic on the acoustic guitar and the voice, and it actually, it's fantastic. Again, this assumes that the musician balances themselves well. Again, if they strum really loud and sing really quiet,
Right.
it's
That's not
not
going
going
to
to
work.
work.
Right.
But somebody, there, it's this thing where if I sat in a chair in front of you and you sang and played for me and it sounded beautiful and balanced, I should be able to stick a mic there and
Hmm.
get a pretty good thing. You probably want it a little bit closer because how we process in real time and space is a little different than how the mic does, but that same thing maybe moved in a little bit closer. There's no reason you can't get a really, really good sound just from that. Oh, I'll throw out one other little tip. You didn't ask for it,
Great.
but
Great. Great.
one thing too is that situation where some people just sing a whole lot better if they're playing, especially kind of when you've got these sort of natural kind of fermata things where like ba da 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 and da 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 da. If you tracked a guitar to a click track and then tried to sing on top of that, it's not going to work as well. And a lot of people who've never done that can't really do it. So one thing you can do to get a really killer sound is go ahead and record mic on the voice, mic on the guitar, uh, and record that, and then have the musician play again, listening, overdub it. And it's actually not that generally not too difficult for somebody to overdub a second guitar to their performance of singing and playing. It's much easier than trying to sing to a guitar. And that way you've got some really cool options for either creating kind of a lush stereo track or even mostly replacing the original guitar. So, because if you bring in mostly the overdub guitar with the original voice, they don't have those same phase problems because they're capturing different moments in time. So you can end up with a really fantastic, beautiful sound that's easy to mix.
Okay. So even though it may not be exactly this a perfect double, it's still, in fact, that's working to your favor because it
Mhm.
will create less phasing.
Yeah, assuming somebody's a decent player can get it in the
Yeah.
ballpark. If
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
completely out to lunch, then there's nothing we can do about that.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I thought you were gonna say split it and then re-record the vocal and then re-record the guitar, but the original vocal would probably work.
Yeah, and of course there's going to be original guitar bleeding into that vocal mic, but as long as it's the right chords,
Right.
we might hear that as like a little bit of chorusing or something like that. But and a lot of those elements can actually be kind of pleasing and nice. So it's certainly an experiment to try if you're trying to get the best possible sound quality, but still get that natural feel of getting to sing and play at the same time.
And what about for just any recommendations for someone who's doing a live stream, possibly one mic? Maybe I guess you sort of said that, just one mic a few feet away.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, one thing about this to get kind of a little um, techie for a second is a lot of those. An SM57 is, to get techie, is a moving coil dynamic microphone. And there's a lot of great ones, like the EV RE20 is an amazing microphone. The Sennheiser 421, Electro Voice RE10, all these cool mics. They generally have a little bit lower output than some of the condenser mics. So you need to crank those up a lot more. So if you sometimes an SM57 3 feet away from somebody who sings and plays kind of quiet, you might have trouble getting enough level, or if you've got really cheap preamps, they might get real noisy when you crank them up. So that's one issue you've got to wrestle with. But really, a single mic and condenser mics will usually have a kind of wider, call it the polar pattern, and less rejection. So they're going to capture, condenser will capture more of the room, more of the uh, more of a balanced sound between all the instruments, whereas most of your moving coil dynamics are going to be a little bit more focused. So sometimes your condensers are better options, but I will throw out that for $100 in the world of moving coil dynamics, you're getting into the best microphones ever made. And in that same price point with a condenser mic, you are scraping the bottom of the barrel. So, one thing to think about when you're, trying to save, spend that $100 you've been saving up for a while to buy a new mic.
Okay, so just to review, the 57 is more narrow in its
Yeah.
focus,
Uh-huh.
and that's at $100 ish. And I've got one and I love it, and I use it pretty much
It should be
constantly.
the first mic everybody buys for their studio. And
Yeah,
I make no money from Shure or anything like that, but
yeah,
it
yeah.
just is.
I was funny. I was at some like Shure microphone shootout in some big studio where they were pushing their big fancy microphones, and they had a drum kit set up with a great drummer and a bass player and vocalist and piano player, and it was they had the 57 in every art in every configuration, and at the end I was sitting with the engineer going, just try this one, just try this one, just try the 57. I liked the 57 most of the time
Yeah.
because it seems to just give you naturally what we're going to want in the mix.
Yeah. It's sort of like if you're an aspiring chef and you notice that most of the top chefs in the world were using this knife for this one function that happened to cost $100. Like, well, yeah, but there's this other one that's more expensive. It's like, true, but the top chefs in the world are using this one, for
Right.
um, top chefs
Maybe
are using expensive
maybe
knives,
they
but
know. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
it's worth considering.
No, that's great. That's great. So before we talk about your free gift today,
Yeah.
anything else that you want to we missed? You want to throw out, or
Well, I would say, and this is even beyond guitars, one of the
yeah,
most challenging things for recording at home, or even recording in a big studio. But a lot of times when you're in a big studio, you're on the clock, and there's dollar bills coming out every time you sit around and dither on an idea. But at home, we're sort of like, okay, we got this. One of the biggest mistakes that people make is the thing about making things more complicated. Something about us wired as human beings where we tend to have a desire to make things more complicated, or to or to think the more complicated thing is the superior thing. um, and and that can get you in a lot of trouble. I mean, there are people who are in the studio just for the joy of being in the studio, and they love running down those rabbit holes of doing complicated things. I endorse that 100%. But if you're actually trying to get stuff done, um,
mhm,
really what you should look to do is try to simplify things as much as possible. So, the examples that we just gave here about, simplifying approaches to, guitar recording, that same thing is going to be true for vocal recording. The same thing is going to be true for a violin overdub, a tambourine overdub, all those sorts of things. But also, even when you get into kind of the processing, okay, now I've bought Logic and I'm gonna mix this, and you could spend your whole life and not understand all the things you can do in Logic Pro X,
mhm,
and or try every plugin and things like that. But really focus on, hey, I want to get this done, and really look at basic, simple tools. Because I do a lot of consulting for people around the world, and we do these Skype sessions, and they're saying, hey, I'm having all sorts of trouble doing this. And like, okay, walk me through your process. What are you doing? And I'm like, okay, I've worked on thousands of songs professionally. This has been almost the only thing I've done for a few decades, and I can't wrap my head around what you're doing. And this is your first project.
right,
And
right,
so it's those things about, okay, yeah, like, start as simple as you can. For the processing, think about simple compression, simple EQ. Start with those things and get it great, because really the difference between what you're doing and the work of the men and women who do the work you admire so much isn't that, most of that is they made better decisions with those simple basic tools than you did. And yeah, there is a little fairy dust on the end, duking it out over that last 10%, but most of it, they made better decisions on the basic tools. So really
mhm,
getting complicated, making things complicated is really one of the biggest impediments for a lot of people, of actually getting stuff done. And and truth is, even with arrangement, the more simple your arrangement, the more your thing will naturally sound bigger. And
mhm,
going back, cooking is always such a great analogy for studio production. Like, you go to a really fancy pants restaurant and pay all this money, and they bring you out like this piece of fish and a piece of asparagus, and you're like, what?
right,
Well, what it is they picked out a really good piece of fish, they kept it on the grill the exact perfect amount of time, and they knew how much salt and pepper to rub in on the top, and whether they should squeeze lemon or lime on it.
mhm,
And
mhm,
it's like, wow, amazing. And so you go home and you pile 100 things onto, your cheap piece of fish you bought, and you wonder, why doesn't it have that same punch and impact that the fancy restaurant had? But yeah, simplifying uh, is so important, because even if you listen, like I work with a lot of progressive rock bands and stuff that do insanely complicated stuff. But if you listen, there's really not a lot going on most of the time. If you listen to, most of these great things, they might have, okay, this guy's playing in 7/8, this guy's playing in 3/4, and this guy's in 15/8. But really, it's these three guys doing this,
Mm-hmm.
and there's not a lot of extra embellishment beyond that. Here's the main concept that we're trying to get across.
Interesting. Well, the gear has become less expensive and more accessible, and Logic and the Ableton, all the DAWs have all these things. We see these tutorials, and we think I need the sound, and how does so and so get the sound? But so it's a tendency for a beginner to go, okay, I need this chain that so and so has, right?
Yeah. And one reality not sorry if I cut you off
That's
on
good,
that.
no problem.
Is anybody who kind of look at my Pro Tools rig and open up the plugin menu would laugh. But I say this because you'll see a ton of stuff in there. But the reality is, people are kind of well known, like I sort of am. Companies want us to have their stuff,
Yeah,
so
sure.
so we're not cutting checks for all of that.
Right.
But in the reality is, it is way better to know a couple tools really, really well than to have all sorts of options. Brian Eno, was always basically, he had this like I think like an H3000 Yamaha DX7 and some delay unit. And he basically made like 20 years of his career out of manipulating those. He knew them inside and out. But the thing about it is, when you have a few tools that are really good, like a compressor that really well, that, oh, if there's a lot of low end in the sound, it's going to start distorting when I push it to this level, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. Going, oh, I want to grid up that. Let's run it through this compressor and push it to this level. And you understand that, oh yeah, like if I go up to 10-1 versus 4-1, it starts to grab a little bit. And really knowing a few tools really, really well is way more powerful. Because again, I have this huge collection of plugins, and but when I'm sitting down mixing a record for a client, I'm mostly going back. I mean, I've got a lot of outboard too, which you can see over there, but I'm kind of going back a lot to the same tools over and over again. And then I might kind of at the end of the mix go, oh, let me try and throw that one in. Or if I'm hitting a brick wall, I'll go to the other one. But it's amazing how I have a very big plugin collection, but I do find myself going back to a lot of the same tools over and over again, because I know them really well.
Well, yeah, the effect you will get from using this tool in this kind of way, and at least that's a fast starting point instead of trying every compressor, each time.
Yeah, and anyone who plays like bass or guitar or something like that, if you really know a guitar, whether it's a Strat or a Paul Reed Smith or something, like, oh, this Fender, like, if you dial back the volume knob 30%, it's going to clean up this much. Or get a little darker, get a little brighter, depending on the caps there. And you're going to know, oh yeah, that will get my overdrive pedal to crunch up a little differently if I roll off the tone knob or that. And that's way more powerful than having, 20 different guitars and just randomly pulling off one going, what about this? What about this? What about this?
Right. No, that's great.
Make no comment about all the guitars on the wall behind me.
No. Bring them. Next time we'll do a walkthrough of your every guitars. As long as I've got you here briefly, I want to hear I know you do these when travel is allowed. You do these Italian location recording sessions. Tell me a little bit about that, which I assume you'll be doing next year if we can all travel. But tell me what happens in those things.
You mean like the educational things?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, luckily I've got two sides of my business. I mostly make records for folks, but I do kind of training and education stuff for a little bit of the year. And so I've got this business called Recording Boot Camp. And so I have this sort of 6-day intensive program. And I'm doing less of it now because just the day job of making records is so busy. But I usually do about one in the United States every year, usually in California, Southern California, and one in Europe. And it's usually Northern Italy. So, and I've got a great studio there, and friend of mine's villa. They're the new family in the villa. They moved in before George Washington was president.
Okay, only
Um,
a few hundred years. Yeah. Wow.
so so we do them there, and I also do these
So,
things.
so I'm sorry. Is
Yeah.
that place already outfitted as a studio, or do you just bring all your gear and it becomes your
Well,
own
no,
studio?
actually, in that one, one of the guys from the family that owns the studio, it's multi generations are actually in there. Um, um, was in a band, and he actually converted their rehearsal space into a full blown studio now.
Okay.
So I actually did some records there before it was a studio, and then it became a studio. So we do those, and also I do these things in West Virginia, and the recording boot camp that I do, that's me for 6 days. It's a set curriculum, very intense. And I do what we call the mountain recording retreat, and also do the mountain songwriting retreat in this beautiful old resort in West Virginia. And that one's real different because the curriculum changes every year, and it's a bunch of other mentors. So for the songwriting one, it's myself, a guy named Dave Nachmanoff, who was Al Stewart's collaborator for a long time, and Michelle Schacht.
Wow.
And then the recording one, me, a guy named John Rod, Fett, a couple great women. And so it's a real different thing. Sadly, those got bumped from the spring, and we're making some tough decisions about whether or not the rescheduled dates in the fall are going to happen. But
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, not I didn't come on your thing to
No.
pimp my businesses, but if anyone wants to check out that stuff at recordingbootcamp.com, and I also do a lot of consulting and things like that. But you can go to recordingbootcamp.com and see a bit of what we do when the zombie apocalypse isn't happening.
Well, yeah. One of the things I've enjoyed when I've heard you speak before and watch your YouTube videos, you have a nice way of explaining the complicated things with just enough technology, and there's nothing like being in a room with somebody to go, no, here's what it sounds like here, no, here's what it sounds like there. So
No, I totally agree, and that's kind of been one of the frustrating things. And I love teaching and things like that. I don't have as much time to do it as I normally like to, just because of the other work, which I also love. But that's been one of the challenging, because I'm still doing a lot of consulting and training for people, via Skype from around the world. But there really is a different thing of sitting next to somebody, like changing something on a parametric EQ and making sure they get it. And
right.
listening together and pointing that out and things like that. And it's a very different thing. So that's been one of the things that's been kind of frustrating, is the educational thing. Well, you can do a lot online, which I hope that, there's going to be tons of great content with what you're doing here with the summit. There
Yeah.
really is a different thing about warm bodies in a room, eye contact, and really making sure people connect in a way that's not always possible remotely.
Yeah, I did a mixing thing in Stockholm last year with
Hmm.
Greg Wells and Andrew Sheps, and being in the room with those guys, just their sense of this is too much vocal, this is not enough vocal, just hearing what it sounds like when they know this is enough, this is not too much.
Yep.
It's that visceral thing, right? No
Yep.
YouTube video is going to go, here's what it sounds like, here's what enough sounds like, here's what too much sounds like, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It was fascinating. Fascinating. So let's talk about the gift that you're offering today. Uh, tell us about it's a guitar recording primer. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's basically kind of what we've talked about today. Um, it's not super high tech intentionally, but it's I basically go through some of the core concepts of electric and acoustic guitar recording, kind of things we sort of brushed over today. But I do it in a way where you can actually hear me moving the microphone. So, because this is how things are going to change.
Okay.
Because I said, oh, just stick an SM57 on the cabinet. It's like, well, yeah, but but one of the things people don't understand is, like, close up on a guitar cabinet, moving a microphone this much on a cabinet can be almost a bigger difference than changing to a different guitar.
Wow.
And
Wow.
and the thing about so much of engineering and really getting your chops is being able to predict that a little bit better. So basically, it's actually some content I put together uh, for something else that I've culled out and made available. So it's basically simple walkthroughs of how, without a lot of fancy, elaborate tools, you can actually go in and get some really good killer uh, guitar recordings just by understanding mic placement, understanding even things simple as guitar picks. People overlook how insanely important the guitar pick is,
Wow.
especially with acoustic. If you're playing with an acoustic guitar, what a radical difference guitar picks make. And so it's one of those things that a lot of times people think, oh, I'm not getting the guitar sound I want. What expensive Waves plugin should I buy? It's like, I got a really great option that costs $1 at Guitar Center.
Try this one.
Yes, exactly. So that's it. Again,
Oh, great.
you don't
Beautiful.
you don't even have to sign up for my mailing list or anything like that. But yeah, so just
Oh,
for you
great.
being a part of the summit, obviously you can sign up for my mailing list, which is almost all just recording tips. Yeah, and you can sign up and get that. It's an online class that you can go and stream anytime you want, as long as you want, and come back to it.
Oh, beautiful.
And it's probably about 35 minutes of training, and then an interview with a mic builder if you want to dive in a little bit more about understanding the guts inside of microphones.
Oh, cool. I don't understand what's going on inside there at all, but
Me neither.
but this is great. Well, this is really I'm so excited that we talked about. And folks, if you please let us know what you learned. Post on the Facebook group what your favorite things were. If you have more questions for Ronan, maybe we can get him to answer some questions on the Facebook group.
Absolutely, be more than happy to.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. And really glad we could sort of dig into this and the sounds and see your upside down Viking ship. Now I see where you live and where you are. It's great. It's great.
Yes.
All right. So we're going to sign off. Thanks again, Ronan.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, good. Me too. All right. I'm going to stop. I'm going to press the stop recording button, and we'll see you guys on the Facebook page. And scene.